All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the August 18th, 2020 Finance Committee of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube and all audio and video is being captured and recorded. If anybody has any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, Heather, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Chair Brandstatter.
Here.
Mr. Colby Burks. Ms. Kim Hallbauer. Mr. Richard Nelson.
Here.
Dr. Robert Statt. Ms. Carol Wright.
Here.
Ms. Cheryl Zimmerman.
Here.
All right, thank you.
All right, the meeting minutes from July 9th, 2020 are in your materials. Are there any objections to those as presented? If none, they're approved as distributed. Heather has the agenda for today up. We've got a handful of items, and I'm anticipating we'll get through these in about 30 to 45 minutes. So that's kind of the game plan today to kind of so we can pace ourselves. Bill, will you go ahead and provide a little bit of information with respect to the interim budget review subcommittee on education presentation?
All right, yes, certainly, Chair Brandstatter, and I'm going to back up for just 1 minute. Heather, if you'll show the agenda again. We've got 3 items on the agenda today. One is a presentation that President Thompson is going to be making to the interim budget review subcommittee on education tomorrow. Some of the slides in that presentation will be very familiar to some of you, so we're going to skip over some of those and just try to provide you with some of the newer information. I believe Sean McKiernan is going to be going over those slides for us. I'm going to be providing us an update on the CARES Act funding. And since Sean is going to be touching on the governor's emergency education relief fund status in his presentation, I'm going to focus just on the higher ed emergency relief fund and those 3 pools of funding in terms of that update. And then lastly, I'll provide you with an update of what happened at our first post-secondary education working group meeting as we were kicking off our 3-year review of the performance funding model. But Heather, first of all, if you'll go ahead and throw up the slides for the interim budget review subcommittee on education presentation, that would be great. And Sean, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay, good. So as soon as Heather gets those slides up, okay. As indicated, the meeting is going to be tomorrow morning at 10:30. President Thompson is going to kick off the meeting and go through about half of these slides. And Heather, if you'll go ahead and just start going through some of the slides, he'll provide an overview of the topics. Go ahead. And this is some of that information, Chair Brandstatter, that our council members are very familiar with. We're going to make the committee members aware, the subcommittee members aware of what the Council on Post-Secondary Education does and what is comprised in our Kentucky post-secondary education system. Go ahead, Heather. We're going to share with them some of our statutory duties and responsibilities. As all of you know, we have 39 statutory responsibilities. This is just about 1/4 of those responsibilities. And I don't think the intention is to read through all of those, but maybe just hit some of the highlights like the strategic agenda and the accountability system and submitting the biennial budget request and tuition setting. Go ahead, Heather. President Thompson will then share with members of the subcommittee the various sources of funding for our agency budget, including general fund, tobacco settlement funds, federal funds, and restricted funds. Go ahead, Heather, to the next slide. And then he'll show a breakout of our general fund agency budget and what are the various components of that expenditure budget. And as I said, each of you has seen this information before, so we're not going to spend any time on it today. Go ahead, Heather, to the next slide. The last thing that President Thompson is going to touch on is the budget cuts that our agency has sustained since 2008, and as shown on this slide, since 2011. Our general fund base is down by 28% since 2011 and more than 50% since 2008. I think all of you know that we're down in terms of staff from 97 staff members back in 2008 to 42 today. That's a reduction of 57%. And over the same time period, as our budget has been reduced and we've been reducing staff, our statutory responsibilities and duties have been expanding. So we're doing actually a lot more with less staff than we did 12 years ago. And this is some of the new information. So I'm gonna let Sean take it from here. But at any rate, we were asked to do a review of our agency budget for this subcommittee tomorrow, and to talk about CPE's administration of the GEAR Fund, and to talk about the impact on our agency of COVID-19. One thing we definitely wanted to get in front of this legislative committee is an explanation of the fund swap that occurred in the current fiscal year. So Sean, if you'll go ahead and take it from here.
Okay. We are going to remind the members of the committee that the plan for the current biennium was the budget office put this plan forward, and the House and Senate continued that plan. There was a reduction of general fund in the first year of the biennium, but of course they authorized us to use restricted funds and technology trust fund dollars to make up for that spending. And so it's just very important, because there was just a one-year budget passed, that this committee knows that going forward, our true base amount is that 1920 level of funding that includes that $3.5 million. So we just want to remind the committee that, going forward, they need to be on the lookout to make sure that they restore our funding for fiscal year 22. So not this year, but next year. Heather, next slide. We are going to give some background on the GEAR Fund, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. Governors were given about $3 billion through the CARES Act to provide to education providers. Kentucky received $43.8 million. $13.8 million of that is going to post-secondary education. And that funding is going to be administered by the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Next slide, please. And so here's a chart that gives the breakdown of that $13.8 million. $8.8 million goes to the universities, $2.5 million to KCTCS. The independent colleges, and universities, there's 22 of them that are sharing $1 million. And then CPE has $1.5 million in reserve. And institutions will be able to apply for those dollars. And that's intended to cover any kind of specific incident that might occur at an institution. And so you see there, combined with the $30 million for K-12, there's your $43.8 million in Kentucky GEAR funds. And next slide, please. And so this shows some of the allowable uses of the GEAR funds. They can be used to enhance online programming. They can be used for financial aid for high-need students, can be used for mentoring and advising, COVID-19 testing and contact tracing, and other costs associated with the pandemic response. We made the decision early on that indirect costs or overhead costs would not be something that could be reimbursed with these dollars. And the CPE is not retaining any of these dollars to pay for our administration of these funds or our overhead. So all of these dollars will be used for direct costs. And we will have regular campus reports on the use of these dollars. And the very first reports have started coming in. And very soon we will be dispersing those dollars, and the reports that the institutions provide us, and all of the expenditures will be on the CPE website. And in addition to administering the GEAR funds, COVID-19 has already had an impact on our agency budget. As you are probably well aware, as soon as the pandemic hit, President Thompson asked senior leadership to curtail all discretionary spending. And we redirected a portion of our student success funds to provide grants to public institutions to help with the transition to online learning. In late April, the budget office asked us to plan for a 1% reduction, and they also asked us to keep spending as low as possible. And on top of that 1% reduction, if we could identify other available funds that would lapse, we were able to use vacancy credits to meet our 1% target. It was $113,000. And so essentially we had not proceeded with some personnel decisions. And so we had some savings of about $100,000. And then also we had some savings due to operating restrictions, operating costs of about $52,000. And then contract spaces, which is the program that provides funding to vet and optometry students. That was being transitioned to Kia, and we had some additional funds there that we identified that would lapse. And so instead of $113,000, we were able to present to the budget office a plan for about $300,000, and that funding did lapse to the general fund. For the current fiscal year, for 2021, we've eliminated all discretionary spending, and we are pursuing grants to help complement the state support that we receive. And then on top of this financial response, there have been some operational responses, as you would imagine. There are weekly meetings with campus presidents. CP senior leaders have reviewed the plans and provided guidance on CARES Act spending and campus reopenings. CP staff's administering the GEAR fund distributions. And
Hey, Sean, let me jump in for 1 minute.
Yeah.
And just give a shout out to Travis Powell, Leslie Brown, Kara Couch, administering those GEAR fund distributions and coming up with a contract to get each institution to sign to receive the grants. That's no small feat, and we were able to get that done within our administrative services unit and through the hard work of Travis Powell, and they are to be commended for going the extra mile in that regard.
Travis's shop, Travis and Dawn and Devon and others have hosted webinars and provided information on how to maintain diverse and inclusive learning environments while in an online environment that's been very much at the forefront at CPE. And there's also been some research as to best practices regarding distance learning. Next slide, please.
Hey, Sean, let me jump in and say that actually it was Lee also that actually worked with our campuses one-on-one to get those GEAR funds out. And she worked with a cabinet of workforce, education and workforce to make sure that we got it in place. So I wanted to make sure that everybody got the shout out that did the work on that.
As you can imagine, with the transition to online, CPE runs the Kentucky Virtual Library, and we were able to extend online content to statewide to non-member K-12 schools and libraries. So it was a very important thing that we were able to do to provide those resources to students that wouldn't otherwise have those resources, virtual learning, library resources. And CPE and Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives are ensuring that all public libraries have access to the virtual library for this current year as well. And then finally, a couple of CPE administrative staff members are helping with unemployment claims. So that's making very valuable use of their time. As you can imagine, not many people are in the office. And so we're able to make use of their time and help in the cause of filing and getting people paid and unemployment claims paid. And then finally, of course, GEAR Up has done a great job in modifying their service delivery for this online environment. And they did a great job at the end of last year. And if something were to happen and we don't go back to school this year, I'm confident that they'll do a great job in providing services to students and families at the schools that they serve. So that is the presentation we have planned for tomorrow. Any questions about what we just covered?
And President Thompson, do you have any comments that you would like to make with respect to the presentation tomorrow to the Interim Budget Review Subcommittee on Education?
No, I think you actually made them well. Just one last quick statement on, we've been cut 57%, and we've got far more unfunded mandates. And you're wondering, did we have that much leeway in our budget before? The answer is no. We've been able to replace this through lots of grants. To be honest with you, people have enjoyed what Kentucky has been doing and have been very generous to us. So you'll see a lot of our employees, and I think we try to, we show that it's important that we do what we want to do. That's one thing. The board has worked with us. You guys have to make sure we focus on the things that were a priority from your viewpoint and from ours. So that's the other way of doing it. Some things, I won't mention which ones here, it'd take too long, that we found out probably we were spending some time on that didn't give us the return on investment. So we put some things on hold in addition to getting other dollars to help us do our work. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, President Thompson. The next item on our agenda is an update on CARES Act funding. And Heather, if you would, go ahead and put that PowerPoint presentation up. And while she's doing that, I'll just say that this was a presentation that we actually had begun to put together for the Interim Budget Review Subcommittee on Education. And I guess about 3 days ago, they asked us to switch topics and to concentrate more on a review of our agency budget. But as Sean and Ron Carson and others on my staff know, I operate under the rule that you never let a PowerPoint slide go unused. So we went ahead and decided we would provide an update to the Finance Committee today. And Heather, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, Chair Brandstatter has asked us to keep this short. I'm only going to concentrate on the new information. So if you'll skip to slide 3, I think, yeah, that was it. The one with the red font on it, that one, yes. There are actually 4 pools of CARES Act funding that our higher education institutions in Kentucky can access. 13.8 million in year fund grants. And some of that funding goes to the public institutions, about $1 million to the private, and 1.5 million reserved at CPE. And that was just covered in the presentation that Sean just gave. So we're not going to cover that ground again. 68.1 million in higher education emergency relief fund grants to students, with 54.5 million for the public institutions. That's both universities and KCTCS institutions. 13.6 million for private and proprietary institutions, 68.1 million in HERE fund awards to institutions, again, with funding for the public universities and KCTCS institutions and for the private institutions. And then lastly, the 4th pool of funding is 6.4 million in higher ed emergency relief funds. And those are dollars going to historically Black colleges and universities and to institutions that participate in the Strengthening Institutions Program, or SIP program. And as you can see, that's 5.4 million for the public institutions and 943,000 for the private. Now, in this particular presentation, as you read through any of the slides, because I'm not going to cover all of them, we really just wanted to focus on the amounts allocated and accessed through July 31st of this year by our public institutions. And so that's what I'm going to be covering today. If you'll skip over the next several slides, Heather, Sean has already covered those. Those have to do with the gear fund. And go to slide number 8. Next slide. I'm just going to hit the tables. As I said a moment ago, in terms of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, the portion, the 50% that are grants to students, and these are emergency financial aid grants. There was a total of $54.5 million allocated to our universities and to KCTCS. Those numbers are shown in the first column of numbers in this table. The second column of numbers shows how much of that allocated amount has been requested for reimbursement as of the end of the fiscal year, July 31st. And about 45.6 million of the $54.5 million total has been requested as of the end of the fiscal year. So about 83.7% of the available funding. Now, I will tell you, I got an email this morning from the University of Louisville letting CPE staff know that their percentage is now 100% on this table. So as of today, they're not at 95.8%. They've accessed all 6.2 million of those funds for grants to students. Same thing for KCTCS. About 2 days ago, we received an email correspondence from KCTCS. So soon after the end of the fiscal year, a couple of institutions have now hit 100%.
Bill, is this, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is this kind of use it or lose it money, or I guess what is the term on this? And are we anticipating that everybody's going to hit 100% by the end of that, whatever that term is?
Well, once you submit an application for these funds, you have a year to access those dollars. And we've heard that some institutions want to use some of the funding as a recruiting tool to help boost their fall enrollments. And so those dollars will be distributed this fall and even into the spring.
Got it. Okay, so it speaks to the strategy of how they're using those dollars.
Correct.
Okay.
Heather, if you'll skip to the next table, that's table on page 10. Okay, this is the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, the awards to institutions. This is the residual 50% of the funding in the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund that was awarded to institutions went for emergency financial aid grants. The residual is awarded to institutions to cover direct COVID-19 related costs. Again, because it's 50%, there's $54.5 million available. And again, you can see the institutional grant allocations in that first column of numbers. And these are just our universities, public universities, and KCTCS. In the second column of numbers, you can see that 32.5 million roughly had been requested for reimbursement as of the end of the fiscal year, ending July 31. So about 60% of the funding had been requested for reimbursement as of July 31st. And again, in the email that we received a couple of days ago from KCTCS, you can see that at the end of the fiscal year, they had only accessed 16% of the available funding to cover their COVID-19 related costs. They are now at 60%. And so our institutions are doing a good job of getting these grant funds out to students and accessing their awards to cover their COVID-19 costs on their campuses. Okay, Heather, the last slide that I'm going to cover in this section, well, I'll probably have two more. But slide 13, yes. And, there are several categories covered in this particular allocation of higher education emergency relief funds. There's historically Black colleges and universities. There's tribally controlled colleges and universities. There's minority serving institutions. And then there are participants in the Strengthening Institutions program. And all of those institutions could have potentially accessed this pool of funding. But in Kentucky, we only had institutions that qualified for funding either as an HBCU in the case of KSU, Kentucky State University, or participants in the Strengthening Institutions program, which includes EKU, Moorhead, Western, and all 16 of our KCTCS institutions. And so you can see in the first column the allocations that were made available to institutions through either the HBCU or the SIP categories. And it's a total of a little over $5.4 million. And then you can see in the next column of numbers the reimbursements requested by July 31st, about 1.952 million or 36%. And again, Chair Brandstatter, institutions have up to a year to access these funds as well. Heather, I think I will go ahead and go over the next slide because this is new information. The CARES Act provided a little bit of additional flexibility to the HBCUs and tribally controlled colleges and universities, minority serving institutions, to utilize this pool of funding. And so they're a little bit broader in terms of their definition of what these funds can be used for. And in the act itself, it says that these funds have to be used specifically to address needs directly related to coronavirus. And that's to defray expenses incurred by the institutions or for grants to students. But if you look at those subheadings under defray expenses incurred by higher education institutions, it's lost revenue, it's reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs to transition to distance education, faculty and staff training, and this one was a new one. It can be used for payroll for faculty and staff. Then in terms of grants to students, those grants can be for any component of a student's cost of attendance, including food and housing, course materials and technology, healthcare and childcare. And so in terms of the uses of these funds, they've allowed a lot more discretion and a lot broader definition of how those funds can be used to address expenses on the part of the institutions or grants to students to address the cost of attendance. And so I don't anticipate that there will be any problem at any of our institutions accessing that 5.4 million. So that's an update of where we are in terms of the CARES Act funding. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, are you also, oh, we're already set, heading into the performance funding working group. Let's roll on into that. Yeah,
and in the interest of time, we've already hit the 30-minute mark. You had indicated you wanted the meeting to go about 30 minutes and perhaps no longer than 45. I'm just going to give an update and not necessarily go through the slides because it would take about an hour to really do any of the slides justice that we've included in your packet. But let me just tell Finance Committee members what is in your packet. There's an agenda from the first meeting of the performance funding work group. There's the PowerPoint presentation that Heather had up on the screen momentarily, but we're not going to go into that today. It's about a 39 slide presentation, and there's a lot of really good information in there. And then there's an 8-page report that contains tables calculating percent change, average annual growth rates, and student success metrics. But then also containing graphs, 4 graphs for each table. So a total of 40 either tables or charts that really show the trends in the student success metric data over the past 5 or 6 years. And so that's some really interesting information. So I would encourage our council members to take a look at that and get back to me or Sean McKiernan if you have any questions in that regard. But rather than going through the slides, I'm just, if it works for you, Chair Brandstatter, I'll just give about a quick 5-minute update on what happened at that first meeting.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, as many of you probably know, the performance funding statute, KRS 164.092, requires that the post-secondary education working group convene in 2021 and every 3 years thereafter. And it's for 3 purposes: to determine if the funding model is functioning as expected, to identify any unintended consequences of the model, and to recommend any adjustments to the model. And the results of that review and any recommendations of the working group are to be reported to the governor, the interim joint committee on appropriations and revenue, and the interim joint committee on education. As I mentioned earlier, the working group met for the first time on July 30th. And at that meeting, President Thompson kicked off the meeting and discussed several things. He discussed the role and responsibilities of the working group. He talked about the timeline for completion of the group's work and proposed meeting dates. And at the meeting, CPE staff actually proposed that the group complete its work by December 15th. And the reasoning behind that date is because the short session of the General Assembly kicks off on January 5th. And so we want to be able to complete our review and have our recommendations ready by the start of the short session of the General Assembly. Staff also proposed that the working group have 4 additional meetings, and they coincide with the first Wednesday of the month in September, October, November, and December. And I believe that we pretty much got buy-in from all of the work group members in terms of when we want to complete the work of the working group and the next 4 scheduled meetings. President Thompson also discussed the initial impetus for the development of the model, and there was some discussion about that. And also shared information about the state goals for higher education that the funding model is intended to achieve. During my part of the meeting, I shared with the group some of the major decision points and decisions that were made by the previous working group that led to the development of the current model. I discussed some of the major components and distribution methods of the model and provided a list of current model metrics and weighting. Finally, I shared information showing trends in student success metric data, including bachelor's degrees and student progression at the universities and credentials and student progression at the community college. Lastly, David Mahan presented the results of 3 performance funding surveys. One of those surveys was completed by university presidents. One was completed by KCTCS institution presidents, all 16. And one was completed by the KCTCS system office. And the consistent theme that we saw throughout those surveys and in the discussion that took place after our presentation was that the lack of funding for the model is a serious problem and has been for the last 3 years that we've been implementing the model. As I've indicated, the meeting concluded with an hour-long discussion among work group members so they could share perspectives with one another. And the main takeaway from that part of the meeting was that there were several group members that indicated that they would like to maybe see the model paused or delayed due to the uncertainties associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. The last thing we discussed was next steps, and we told the working group that at the September meeting, we would have a representative from HCM strategist join the meeting and provide a status report on outcomes-based funding nationally. We've asked President Jay Box and Wendell Followell from KCTCS to present trends in the 2-year college student success metric data and to provide a financial impact analysis of their funding model. And they have some suggested adjustments that they've already discussed with their 16 community college presidents, some suggested adjustments to that 2-year college model that they would like to share with the working group. And then lastly, CPE staff has been asked to conduct some additional analyses of the model's impact and to run some various scenarios. And so we're going to provide that data at the next working group meeting. And I'll stop there and say, that in a nutshell is what we covered at the first performance funding work group meeting. President Thompson, would you like to jump in and share some of your insights from that first meeting?
Only that everybody agreed that it was designed originally to have new funding put in. The item that I think also most people agreed with are that the majority of the metrics are the correct ones. from a statewide perspective, in which I kind of look at myself as representing, just to let you know that behavioral change has happened because of the model. And we've done things that other states haven't been able to do nearly as well, such as really put, a higher percentage toward our North Star, which is 60 by 30. And we've closed gaps as we've done that. So I would say that most people agree that the metrics are the correct ones. We have a lot of disagreement, though, on how it should look in the future. And in the next coming sessions, we'll talk about those.
Chair Brandstatter, I thought it might be helpful just to remind members of the Finance Committee who is on the Performance Funding Work Group. It's the 8 presidents of the public universities. It's the KCTCS president, Jay Box, at least it was at our first meeting. President Thompson, president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. And then it's representatives of the Speaker of the House. And in this case, that's Representative James Tipton, representative of the President of the Senate. And in this case, that's Senator David Givens. And then the State Budget Director, John Hicks. And so those are the members that comprise the Performance Funding Work Group.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. Appreciate that update, and I appreciate you keeping it focused. From my perspective on what the Finance Committee is looking at between now and the rest of the year, this is really going to be a key component. The outcome of this working group is going to be key to setting the stage for really the next 3 to 4 years of movement in performance across the state. It is nice to see that we're seeing results out of this. Just in the few short years, doing the freeze on the stop loss was important this 1 year, but I do feel as though it's important to keep the momentum on that topic. So I'm sure that's going to be a focus of the conversation. And Aaron, I appreciate you bringing up the strategic plan, the 60 by 30, and how this is going to will impact that and our ability to achieve those results. And hopefully the legislature can find some new funding and we can see that coming through. So does anybody else on a committee have any questions or comments on this topic? No? All right. I don't see anybody raising their hand. I did also kind of want to take a second, and we also had this morning the Academic and Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting as well. That meeting ran a little bit long on my calendar, and so I wasn't able to give kudos and well done to staff and our consultant on the progression of the software that we're working on, looking at coursework and the implementation of that on all of our campuses. So that is really exceeding my expectations. So kudos to them on that. And I look forward to that project getting finished here in the next 6 months and seeing how that's going to really drive decision-making processes over the course of the next few years. Hopefully we can also include some time at our work session, which I will kind of move into that. Our next full council meeting is going to be on September 14th and 15th. We have a work session on the 14th and our business meeting on the 15th. Moody's is going to come back and present to us at our work session on the 14th. For those of you who have been here around for a few years, they presented to us about 2 years ago now, looking at bond ratings and kind of providing a little bit of a benchmark on how we perform financially across the rest of the country with our peers. And yes.
I believe currently we have them scheduled to present at the business meeting.
I'm sorry, Heather. Yes.
Well, if you
right.
want it at the work session, just let me know and I'll see if I can get that changed. But
no,
okay.
We're not changing. Yeah, I'm getting my days mixed up there. But
One mix.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's all that I've got. Can we have unless anybody else has anything, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Ben, a quick question. Are those, Heather, are those meetings going to be virtual or are they going to be in-person meetings, the work session and the business meeting in September?
Currently, we are planning on all virtual. Currently, we still have a stay on no travel for state employees. And so I think right now we're still just sticking with virtual meetings.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and Richard, we talked about that at our executive committee meeting last week, and actually there's a fair number of council members who their companies also have a travel hold going on as well. So we were trying to find a way to get together in person, but it's looking like September is going to be virtual. I think Heather's already sent out some meeting requests for that, so we should be all set.
Chair Brandstatter?
Yeah.
Just one last thing. Before the meeting started today, I told Sean that we needed to try to keep this to 45 minutes or under. And he said he would buy me a steak dinner if we could get this done in under 45 minutes. So as soon as this COVID-19 pandemic gets behind us, I'm looking forward to my steak dinner because he didn't think this was possible.
Well, Bill, we're not done yet.
I need recommendations on cheap steak dinners.
Well, Sean, I'll
Bill
take a
would
side.
have 'em.
I'll take a side bet if we go over 45 minutes, Sean, and I'll settle for Chili's or Olive Garden.
That sounds good.
Okay, all right. Carol, I think you were getting ready to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, do we have a second? Ms. Zimmerman, all right. And all those in favor, hit the leave button on your Zoom call.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.